This summer, I did a transmission swap for my BMW 330ci. First thing I did was buy a new rear differential with a different ratio, so this should give it a little bit more get up. I'm just checking over to make sure the gears don't look bad, and I'm changing the fluid in the gasket. Then at the start of this summer, I refurbished the transmission that I pulled out of a parts car last summer. So I'm just cleaning off some of the grease, replacing bushings. I'm going to be doing the shift pins you'll see in a bit. Here I'm making sure the clutch fork has a nice pivot pin. And I'm putting the shifter linkage back together with all new bushings. This is quite a long process. Here I'm starting the fifth and reverse detents, which was a long process. Took about a week, doing a few hours a day. I broke a couple tools, but I finally got it all in, so now the shifting is a lot smoother. Once I did the fifth gear detent, the reverse was a lot quicker now that I knew what I was doing, but it still took about 2 hours. And then after this I have to do the first, second, and third gear detents, which were much quicker luckily, and we're out of the top. These bolts were pretty rusted and seized, so I bathed them in a vinegar solution. Now I'm jacking up the car to get it ready to pull everything out. And starting with the interior, I pulled all of the old automatic shifter parts. Then underneath I started with the exhaust, then the heat shield, and then the drive shaft, and then the rear diff, which you'll see in succession. I had to pull the front end apart a little bit so I could spin the crankshaft myself, so I could get to the bolts on top of the drive shaft. This all took about 12 hours on a weekend. I had to get the sway bar out of the way, that way I could get to the rear differential. The current rear differential was a 338. I replaced it with a 307, which is a longer gear ratio, but because the transmission is geared differently, the final drive is shorter, so it should be a little quicker with a lower top speed. Now I'm just pulling all the automatic stuff out and pulling that automatic transmission, which was very tough. That thing weighed a lot. This is getting the new rear diff in, and if you can tell, I painted some of the old carriage for it since it was getting rusty. So I scrubbed off the rust and repainted it. Now I'm just putting everything back together. Here I'm doing the rear main seal. That's a common leak point, so while everything was out, it was smart to get to it. Put in the pilot bearing, flywheel. Next is the clutch and pressure plate. This is the wiring for the reverse light switch. Now I have to pull the rest of the interior out so I can swap the pedals, because I need a clutch pedal and a smaller brake pedal. I was also doing wiring at this point, which I did not film because it was all in tough spaces, but I had to wire the clutch switch into the DME and the ECU, and the reverse light switch into the reverse light relay. So that's all the wiring you see here. Here's my first attempt at getting the transmission in. It took a few attempts, but I did finally get it in after the end of a 12-hour day. Unfortunately, after that I blew up the slave cylinder, so here I'm figuring that out. Very disappointed. I did end up getting it back in and finishing the swap a few weeks later. I stopped filming at that point, unfortunately, because I just wanted to get it done finally. So that in total was about 40 hours of work across 2 weekends, spaced apart as I was waiting for parts.